Very good. So it is true that 19 years ago we had the first global conference, and it's wonderful to be able to have these series of events where we can bring many different traditions together, focus on parts of Buddhism which has not been focused on before, discuss meditation in a deep way, and also to even maybe just change the world. Somehow this meditation, this mindfulness, these wonderful teachings which are available can help people from all places actually overcome their depressions and see a much better way of life, and actually to take this world in a more positive direction. And that is one of the reasons why we call this particular conference Beyond Mindfulness. We all know what mindfulness can do. We can take it much further. And when we take it further, there's so many ways that we can get beyond things like depression. While we can get beyond enmity, which separate human being from human being, religion from religion, race from race, politics from politics, we can actually find those bridges which we're going to talk about later on today, about how we can use some of these teachings in a ways which mean we don't need violence. We don't need revenge. As somebody was reminding me, one of their favorite sayings, which apparently I said, was, we don't need revenge in this world. Why seek revenge when we believe in karma? Because karma will get the bastards anyway. So in other words, it's simple teachings. And I say this in local language. So people can remember it and put it into practice. And when we do put it into practice and it starts to work, what a wonderful thing it is to be able to serve other people. I did actually write something down, scribbled it down. It's one of those sayings about mindfulness said by the Buddha, which actually can take it further. It's from the suttas. It's always good for the mindful one. The mindful one dwells in happiness. It is better every day for the mindful one, and they are free from enmity. And the Buddha corrected the person who said that. He said, no. It is always good for the mindful one. The mindful one dwells in happiness. It is better every day for the mindful one, but they're not free of enmity. There's something more which is needed. And I'm sure once you hear what the Buddha said, what is extra which is needed, I think everyone in this room would agree. That one whose mind, day and night, takes delight in harmlessness, who has loving kindness to all beings, for them there is enmity with no one. And one of the things I like in that saying is that who delights in harmlessness. That we don't practice compassion and kindness because we're a Buddhist and we're supposed to. It's something we delight in the beauty of helping one another, serving one another, and have loving kindness to all beings, including oneself. And when one has loving kindness to oneself as well, as to all other beings, then enmity disappears. It's very difficult to see the difference between human beings. And that is one of the reasons why that I'm very happy to see so many bhikkhunis, fully ordained nuns, also presenting at this conference, which means that we have this wonderful support for all beings. You're delighting in harmlessness, in service. That is one thing I hope we focus on in this conference, beyond mindfulness, service, kindness, helping those who are marginalized. So I hope you really enjoy this conference and get much out of it. Unfortunately, you will hear from me many times later on. So I will finish off now with the next speakers coming up. And I'm not sure if I went over time or under time or in time, but as a Buddhist monk, we are beyond time. Thank you very much.
"20,000 years ago, a group of pilgrims crossed from Asia to North America over a land bridge. During the last century, a new wave of pilgrims crossed over a different kind of bridge, bringing Buddhism from east to west. The members of this morning's panel are the descendants of that wave of pilgrims who continue to build bridges between east and west, between past and present, between Theravada, Mahayana, and Tibetan traditions. You could call them bridge Buddhists, who are charged with the task of finding common ground among the rich and varied traditions of Buddhism. Our moderator for this panel on building bridges across traditions is the director of the Berkeley Buddhist Monastery, Reverend Heng Shi.
Good morning, everybody. Since our panel is the first one, our job is to introduce some of the themes of the entire gathering. As committed Sangha members from the Theravada, Mahayana, and Tibetan traditions, we're in a position to represent the state of the Dharma in the West in the year 2019. The idea is that Buddhism began in Asia, but has now come over a bridge to the West. And representatives of authentic Buddhist traditions from Southeast Asia, from East Asia, and from the Himalayas have all arrived in the West, passed on their practices and their stories to a second generation of, you might call, bridge Buddhists. Here we are. That is to say, our teachers were the pioneers and the pilgrims who built one end of that bridge from Asia to the West. Our job now as second generation teachers and practitioners is to plant our end of the bridge firmly in Western soil. We cross back over to Asia to refresh our awareness of the rich traditions we've come from, and then we return to introduce what we have learned to the new generation here in the West. Here we are in your global Buddhist gathering here in Berkeley. We have available to us as never before all the resources of the Dharma. That is to say, the sutras, the practices, the traditions, the languages, the food, the music, and also the cultural baggage of the past comes with us as well. Some of that tradition will not translate into the cultures of the West. Some tradition practices, such as Zazen and Vipassana, chanting, have already taken root in the new topsoil in North America, Europe, Latin America. Deepening and enriching these practices of the Dharma so they survive the challenges of the 21st century depends upon you all, this next generation of Buddhist practitioners. So other practices like devotion perhaps will take more time, more customizing before they become ours. So mindfulness has now been introduced to millions as one aspect of Buddhist practice. And we are here, tellers of sacred stories, stories of liberation from suffering. Many of us are hyphenated Buddhists. We might be Jewish Buddhists, known as Jubus. Some of us are Methodist Buddhists. Some of us are scholar Buddhists. Some of us are Pentecostal Buddhists. Is that fair? Yeah. We are male and female, Asian, African, European. What we share is a passport to the Dharma realm and a visa to the Dharma. A love of the insights that cultivation reveals, and a wish to share the gifts of compassion, the sense of connection with living beings, and the security of refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. So, having introduced our topic today, I'm going to introduce each speaker in turn, and we have 8 minutes apiece. I'm going to be tough on you. Ding! We're going to, number one, talk to the story of what in your Buddhist tradition inspired you to devote full time to its cultivation? And 2, what part of your tradition do you plan to leave on the other side of the bridge, so to speak, and not introduce to the West? What part of your tradition is the most challenging and needing of innovation as we introduce the Dharma to the next generation of students? So that's the plan, and I'm going to start on my left to introduce to you Venerable Dr. Panyawati. Now her bio, we could do the 8 minutes telling your story, but I want to let you tell the story. She is a former Christian pastor. She is the co-founder and co-abbot of Embracing Simplicity Hermitage in Hendersonville, North Carolina. And she is now the co-director of Heartwood Refuge, a new intentional community. President of the Treasure Human Life Foundation. She's ordained in both Theravada and Chan traditions, and she is a contemplative and empowered for compassionate service. The biography goes on to some of the highlights. She has created villages in India with approximately 30,000 people living there, providing micro grants and wells and books and improving their schools. My own experience with Venerable Panyawati is going to visit Heartwood Hermitage and Embracing Simplicity Hermitage and meeting face-to-face the young high school graduates who, before she found them in the bus station, lost and on edge, she brought them into her community, embraced them, put them through high school, and got them jobs in her own bakery, a vegan, gluten-free bakery. So this is Dr. Venerable Panyawati.
Some of that bio is old. You know, when there's a good story, people like to continue it on. But we keep advancing, we keep moving on. There's so many people, so many needs that need to be met around the world that we can't like just do one thing. We have to do many things. And like today, I know I'm supposed to be representing the Theravada today, so I think I got you a little bit mixed up because I have on my Tibetan blouse today. And I did that particularly by intention, because we can get so fixed in our views, so fixed and so established in our way of doing things, our way of understanding things. But the expansive mind, the oceanic mind, can embrace all of these and move beyond the linguistics or even the outer accoutrements and come to know what is really true. We think in terms of our who we are today as what we should be and what we should represent, but I think I must have lived 10,000 times before, and so there's something from the past that kept impacting me that wasn't present with me now. And it's like that with me around the traditions and understanding the traditions. We use words to describe things. We use words to take us into a direct experience. And if we come from this country or that country, we may use certain words and we may apply them in certain ways. But if we consider that we've lived 100,000 times, I have all kinds of ways to express things or to understand things or to do things. And so we shouldn't just be stuck, I feel, on who we are today in this life. And so in that sense, I have not fared well in any one tradition. I think there's just Buddhayana for me, you know, and that pressing in to the fully awakened, expansive mind. But I've used each tradition to help awaken or rekindle or make it plain some part of how to do this that has been useful to me. And so we talk about keeping our sects, not sex, S-E-X, sects, S-E-C-T-S, keeping them pure, not mixing. But I think for me, the purity is the blending of them, because they help me to understand different things at different times, different situations, different applications, and certainly different people. When I run into my Christian friends, they ask me, when did I leave God and when did I leave Christianity? I was like, I never left. I'm still on the path. I don't care whether you call it an anity, a ism, a ist. It doesn't matter to me. I'm just on the path, the way leading upward. And so in different times, it takes us into different, there are different things that we aspire to know. You can't answer a question that hasn't been answered, but I was asking questions. So the answers availed themselves to me. The answers came. And part of those answers required that I step outside of what I already knew. It wasn't that I rejected, but I felt there must be more. And what I already knew, and I had to open myself to what I didn't know, what I considered foreign, what I was told not to look at. But if I had looked at everything available to me and I still felt something was lacking, where do you go? You go to what you don't know. So I went there. So right away somebody introduced me. I mean, just as soon as the thought, there's the action coming at you. Somebody comes down the street and offers me a Buddhist book. But actually, this is my first book, and it was a book on dependent origination. It had the wheel of life with the monster holding the teeth and all the animals on the wheel. And I put up the sign of the cross. I didn't want to see that. And it took 18 years for the Dharma to come back around to me. So even when the Dharma was calling me, I was not ready for it. But 18 years later, after I'd gone through everything, gone to Unity, gone to UU, gone to Taoism was the last one that I was in, and I loved it so much. And I was asking my great master questions, and he finally looked at me and said, "Buddhism is for you." I said, "No. I looked at that. I'm not interested in that." He said, "No, Buddhism is for you." And basically, he was kicking me out. He was sending me to kindergarten. He was sending me to the great teacher. And I'm so grateful for that, because intellectually, I could get a lot of this, and I could spit it right back out. But I didn't really understand it. But he sent me to the Buddha. And the Dharma, 2 minutes, the Dharma started, I was Pentecostal all night, all right, so you do have to keep me on time. So the Dharma began to break it down for me in a way that I could really understand it. Giving a baby milk is good, but you try to give him meat, you'll kill him. And so I started with this milk and gradually moved on to pablum and gradually moved on until I can eat meat. And you know what I mean? I can digest things. Oh, well, I really do, but I could digest. And so this is what brought me. I never left the path. From the beginning of my life, I'd always had a vision and a view for something, and I didn't know what it was. But the Dharma has brought me to what I know is the path of completion. So some of us study Dharma. Some of these practices, actually, we don't study Dharma. We are the Dharma. And so when we bring these together, I think we can come up whole and complete, lacking in no good thing.
Can I hear a hallelujah? Can you give me a bodhisvaha? Bodhisvaha! Hallelujah! Bodhisvaha! That's for you. I'd like to introduce Venerable Jen Hu to my right. Venerable Jen Hu, originally from Taiwan. His life actually encompasses both Eastern and Western cultures. He came to the U.S. as a teenager, went on to graduate from California Institute of Technology, University of California, San Diego, with a PhD in physics, computer science, AI. Appreciate you two, you and Ajahn Brahm need to talk. So great Master Weijie of Zhongtai Monastery in Taiwan shaved his head and taught him the Dharma. He immersed himself deeply in the study and practice of Buddhism. In October of the year 2000, Venerable Jen Hu and 4 other bhikshus came to California to Lafayette to establish Buddha Gate Monastery. I think some of you know about Buddha Gate Monastery. He was the first abbot of the monastery. And then he went on to establish the Sunnyvale Zen Center, which is one of Silicon Valley's premier places to learn how to meditate and to learn to study the sutras. And they have, in the few years they've been there, really done a job of bringing the proper Dharma to Silicon Valley. He's educated in Western science, but has a deep affection for classical Chinese culture and is uniquely suited to bridging the gap between the East and West. Go back and forth on that bridge. Venerable Jen Hu.
Thank you, Reverend Hensher. My mother brought her children to America for better education. I was 14 when I came to this country, and I was educated here. And when I graduated from college and had a full-time job in the high-tech industry, it was good pay, and the job was easy for me. And however, very quickly I started wondering what's the meaning of life. what's the meaning of making money? Why are we here? And all kinds of mysteries of life that I couldn't figure out that really confused me. So in my search, I first turned to Western religion, and that led me to Western philosophy, and that led me to Eastern philosophy, and that led me to Buddhism. And that's in Buddhism that I found that, different from my previous experiences, this seemed like something real. Somebody's been there, know what they're talking about, and it's an actual experience of those who have gone there and figured it out. And so the more I immerse myself in the Buddhist teaching, the more I'm convinced that it's true. And so it took me 8 years, actually, later when I actually finished my PhD, that I know that I will be a Buddhist for the rest of my life. But then in Chinese Buddhism, there's a prevalent belief that this is the Dharma ending age and nobody can get enlightened these days. The only thing you can do is to chant Buddha's name and hope to reborn in the Pure Land and practice the next life. So I didn't like that, even though it's a great method, but then it doesn't resonate with me. So until I met my Shifu, Grandmaster Weijie, who I think is one of the greatest Chinese Zen masters of the last century, he convinced us that enlightenment is possible. And he explained why in ways that we can understand. He's very profound, very logic, very rational, and he lived his life that way. I never met anybody who is so calm, who can do so much, who can face all the challenges, always mindful. And so this is something real for me, and so I was convinced and decided a few days after I got my PhD to return to Taiwan to become ordained. And then so in the year 2000, I started teaching the Dharma here. Now, as to the questions of what challenges we face, I think I'm really blessed as Reverend Hensher, who familiar in the Asian or Chinese Buddhist history and culture. So I want to just go through a few topics that I actually did a survey of this. When Buddhism went from India to China, it stayed there for 2,000 years, still vibrant, and how did it happen? How did it take root? And how did it flourish in China? And I think that can give us a lot of insight about how Buddhism can take root in the West and flourish. So I want to talk about it from three aspects: from the essence, from the form, and from the function. 体相用, the essence, meaning that what must be preserved, what cannot change, regardless of culture, language, and region. And one of the most important things, of course, is the translation of the scriptures. And that must be accurate and beautiful, as Buddha taught it. And it took the Chinese 500 years to get it right. And they did, over 1,000 years of translation. So from my experience, the Western translations of scriptures are getting better all the time, but still there's a lot of room for improvement. And even though there are a lot of scriptures translated, in reality, probably only 5% of the whole Buddhist canon has seen Western language. But they are the most popular 5% probably, but there are still vast knowledge, vast teaching that most people have never heard of. So this probably will go on for another 100 years. And also, most of the translators, famous Chinese translators of Buddhism into Chinese, are monks who practice, who live their life, who may have been enlightened as well. But most of the translators into the West are scholars, so that's quite different. So this is something we need to think about. Also, a second topic is the building of the Sangha, the monastic Sangha. The three jewels, Buddha, Dharma, and the Sangha. So Sangha, traditionally, Indian Buddhism, Chinese Buddhism, means the monastic community. And that's because when the lay person have to take care of a family and worry about a job and then the children, they can do a real good job, but it's really, really difficult. But the monastics devoted their life to preserve, study, practice, and perhaps propagate the Dharma. So the three pillars must be established, and that is not so much in the consciousness of Western Buddhists yet. 2 minutes, okay. And so another is the comprehensive study of the Buddhist scriptures. And the fourth one is enlightenment. It must be awakened Buddhist teachers every generation to preserve the true Dharma teaching. And you could, as some aspect, awaken to the same thing that the Buddha has seen. And in terms of form, I just read through the topics. We're running out of time. One is the rituals, the services. They are important too for collective practice. And so we shouldn't dispense with it. But how can we do it in Western languages in a way? Hensher Fa Shi has done a great deal, and others have done it, but it's still more to be done. Ordination, proper ordination, still very difficult for Westerners. The good and deep, in-depth instruction and practice of meditation. After mindfulness, I wasn't aware that mindfulness was already done with that. So there's still so much principle, theory, and direct experiential knowledge of samadhi, of meditation, that is still not well known yet to most people. How do we teach Buddhism to the younger generation? And I think Taiwan where I'm from, has done a great deal, and we can look into that.
Next to my right, someone we've already heard from this morning with the healing mantras is Drukmo Gyal Dakini. She was born in northeastern part of Tibet into a Tibetan yogi family where mantras and meditation were introduced at a young age. With the support from the local Tibetan yogic community and families, she practiced mantras with traditional old melodies and then first sang publicly in 2008. She moved to Europe 6 years later in order to work with the Sorik Khan International organization, which is one of the biggest organizations, an academy of traditional Tibetan medicine in the West. And she has now produced 5 albums of Tibetan healing mantras and chants. We heard some of them this morning with musicians from all over the world. She's traveled to more than 20 countries to share concerts, public talks, workshops, and courses on healing mantras, yoga, meditation, as well as external therapies according to traditional Tibetan medicine. So one of the focuses of all her activities is helping women find equality, helping mothers and children to view each other with divinity and compassion through Tibetan spiritual healing and Buddhist practices. So let's welcome Drukmo Gyal Dakini.
That's the greeting that we would usually say in Tibet. I feel very pressured after hearing all the talks, and then I'm the youngest in flesh. I reincarnated much later. So I think what I'm going to share is more of representing the younger generations. And what Fa Shi is talking about is a grand system and sustainability of how Buddhism can grow in the West. Because I grew up in a Buddhist family, and that wasn't my choice. And Buddhism has developed itself in Tibet since 8th century, pretty strong. So I get to see and witness, experience Buddhist practices since I was 4 or 5 years old. Then when I did see the difference is that when I went to, because I grew up in Tibetan region and it's inside China, and I went to communist schools. Then I had to go through all kinds of modern education, the education of criticism, yeah, and the education of doubt, so that you have to question everything, which is very good, and I enjoyed it. But then that also led me as a teen questioning my parents' faith, and then I didn't have the, I didn't get enough reasons, because I'm trained to get reasons to believe in something, and then I didn't get enough reasons to believe in the belief that my parents, grandparents had. But then I came across Tibetan medicine, which was a very down-to-earth system, talks about how to heal the body. And then healing the body, it involves the mind, it involves the energy. So talking about Tibetan Buddhism, I cannot represent Tibetan Buddhism. I'm too tiny for that. But we call Tibetan Buddhism Vajrayana, so Vajrayana can be understood as a tradition that builds harmony in between lay practitioners and monastics. So that's where I found my place, because I wasn't living my life as a total lay, that I do not have any spirituality, but then I'm not a monastic, I'm not a nun. Then it was a kind of an awkward place, and I didn't know which box I belonged to. But then when the tradition of yogis and yoginis in Tibet, we also call them ngakpa and ngakma. Ngak means mantra, so ngakpa and ngakma can be translated as mantra reciters. So they actually work through their energy, and energy here I refer to breathing techniques and mantras, speech practices. And they work through the speech to balance body and mind. You know that 60% of the diseases nowadays are psychosomatic. So, you know, if the energy is imbalanced, then the energy is going to attack the mind, and the mind is going to attack our body, so we're sick and unhappy. And the other one is, quickly, the innovative approach. So I believe that because the younger generations are so much into science and computer science, so we should really somehow blend the Buddhist practices such as Bardo practices, if you have heard, and dream yoga, Bardo yoga, and Julu, the illusory body yoga. The content of these yogas are massive, and they can be really just presented through VR and through modern techniques and approach to younger generations. So I think that's very, very important approach, very innovative and important approach. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that talk. In the time that we have remaining, the question that we're going to share with each other is, being committed practitioners of traditions, what part of your tradition are you going to leave on the other side of the bridge? Because it does not translate to the 21st century. You're first.
If you come to my center, I have 3 different halls, and if you're coming in purely from an intellectual sense, then I'm going to talk to you from that perspective first. I have a little teeny Buddha, just a little one, in that hall, and we talk about other things, how to deal with the vicissitudes of life and so forth. But if you come in and you're really a student of the Dharma, then I take you into the Theravadan hall, who's got big Buddha, and if you are are not so predisposed to being quiet all the time and that sort of thing, I take you to the Vajrayana Hall. And the Vajrayana Hall has got bells and whistles and lights and it's got everything in there. But I took a Tibetan friend, Lama there one day. When he walked in, he got scared and he ran out. And I said, what's wrong? He said, that Buddha on the main altar. Well, you know, it wasn't a Tibetan Buddha. It was an American Buddha on the altar. And you can imagine what kind of American Buddha, right? So it was an African-American Buddha on the altar. And so I was like, what was I going to do? Make an image that looks like you? And so what I'm leaving behind is the notion that all of this is cultural baggage, because I really don't think that it's cultural baggage. I think that all of these things are important, but we can change the imagery. We can, change the ways that we talk about things. So what I'm leaving behind is the notion that this is only Tibetan, or that's only Chinese, or that's only for Sri Lanka, and this is for Americans. And so just dropping that all and bringing all the different aspects onto the path is what I'm taking up, and that's what I'm dropping off.
So Venerable Jen Hu talked a lot about translation, so let me phrase the question. What about the Chinese Mahayana that you were trained in does not translate currently to Silicon Valley in the 21st century?
I think a lot of the ritual aspects, a lot of people turn to Buddhism because they didn't like the rituals in Western religion. So they are kind of against it and thinking that Zen Buddhism, Chan, has none of that, but actually we do. We have a lot of those. And I was against that too, actually, when I came to Buddhism, until my master told me, explained the meaning behind the chanting, the meaning behind the praise, the meaning behind the ritual. So I think when we have the ritual without understanding the meaning and how it helps you practice, then that's kind of pointless. But when you do understand, it can be another way, a skillful means to help people practice together. I think it's also important to find American culture or Western culture that can integrate well with Buddhist practices. Okay.
So, Drupal, if I were going to ask you the question, you're thoroughly steeped in the tradition of yogis and mantras and healing, but you live in the West. So when you're trying to explain to Westerners, what doesn't communicate that you would like to change, perhaps?
My experience of living in the West is still pretty short, only about 5 years in Europe and traveling around the world. What I see is that people do not have enough trust in themselves. They don't feel comfortable with themselves. And even if you tell them that they're so good, they're just perfectly imperfect. And because we're all imperfect in a sense, but we're perfectly imperfect. And I think people with a lot of love around them try to tell that and try to let them understand, but they could not, like a lot of people in the West, I see that they cannot accept who they are internally. And they try to all be good. And I think that's kind of really tiring. Being a bad person sometimes can take more sacrifices and can actually bring a lot of goodness, but I mean bad in a sense, in a special way of bad, yeah. That's hard to communicate with people in the West.
And I really get the sense that the confidence that you display and the strength and the power of taking a Tibetan Buddhist tradition to the West, that energy comes from your connection to the Dakini tradition, and that's a lesson for us in the West. So thank you very much for that. So there we have it. I think one of the messages that I would like to point out, if it hasn't occurred to all of you, is the collegiality and the friendship on this stage. Men and women, East and West, young and old. I'm going to be 70. She's already 70. Bringing, you want to rebut? That's all right. No. We honor that. Ages, oh my goodness. We're bringing the Dharma to the West together. And this is the next generation, and I've seen a lot of young faces here. There's another generation coming. And this partnership, this collegiality and collaboration demonstrates how past ignorance can be transformed. In the Buddha's own lifetime, 17 competing schools developed to compete with each other about what was the right material for alms bowls, right? That sort of thing. That kind of sectarianism.
They didn't kill each other, though.
What's that?
They didn't kill each other.
They didn't kill each other. That's true. We have something in the 21st century that's brand new. That's right. But factions and tribes among religions is an obsolete, narrow perspective. It's a wrong view, you could say. 邪见 in Chinese. It's a wrong perspective. After Earthrise, that famous photograph, the view from the Mariner spacecraft of our small blue marble of Earth, clouded, full of water in this inky vastness of space, we can recognize the Buddha Dharma now as a means, one means of transcending tribal sectarian views, showing us how to be post-tribal living beings and companions on spaceship Earth. So here we are in our Global Buddhist Conference, and let's keep that vision. I'm delighted that we were able to begin this way. Notice that we didn't invite any questions from the audience, and that's because of the number, the quality of the speakers that we have in this conference. Thank you very much for your participation. Look forward to meeting you this afternoon.